Let's start with the numbers. Just figuring out how much foreign assistance is actually entering Afghanistan is a challenge within itself. The money comes from countries all over the world in all different ways, and every publication reports a different number. The most comprehensive source I've found is the Development Coordination Report, published in 2010 by the Afghan Ministry of Finance. It says that since 2002, the international community has pledged $90 billion of official development assistance to Afghanistan. Of this amount, $69 billion has been committed to various projects and initiatives, but only $57 billion has actually been dispersed to Afghanistan. If that's not confusing enough, foreign assistance breaks down into two categories: military assistance, which funds things like the Afghan security forces, and economic assistance, which consists of projects like the ones implemented by USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. No single organization reports aid statistics from every international donor for all three stages of aid and both types of assistance, so it's hard to figure out just how much money is actually entering the country. Just know that every year it is equivalent to over half of Afghanistan's gross domestic product. Okay, that was the easy part. Now time to figure out what the aid money does once it enters the country. According to David Kilcullen, founder of Karis Associates, a consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. that has counseled NATO forces in Afghanistan, there are more questions than answers.
One of them is, does foreign assistance work at all, ever? The second one is, does it work in a counterinsurgency environment like Afghanistan? And then the third one is, even if it does work, are we actually doing it right?
There's no consensus on any of those questions.
Yes, there are some people who, if I put that in one sentence, say that aid, of course, is necessary because Afghanistan is one of the most underdeveloped countries in the world and still in conflict.
That's Thomas Ruddig, co-founder and director and senior analyst of the Afghan Analyst Network in Kabul.
There's probably the other school of people who say that, let's call it aid money, is contributing to the crisis and particularly fueling the corrupt governance which is predominating in Afghanistan. I would not put myself into any of these schools because I think the reality in Afghanistan shows that it is a bit of both.
There are many ways that foreign aid can create more problems than it solves. One of these is that it often increases violence rather than ends it. A Senate Foreign Relations report from June 2011 notes that 80% of USAID's money is sent to the southeast of the country, where Kandahar and Helmand, the country's most insecure provinces, are located. That's only a correlation, but there are many mechanisms by which aid causes violence. One of them is the substitution and income effects, which Kilcullen has studied. The theory was introduced by Charles Wolfe of the Rand Corporation in the 1960s.
He said, look, if you do succeed in bringing a lot of economic development into an area that's affected by an insurgency, you may or may not have what he called a substitution effect, an effect which causes the population to stop supporting the insurgency and start supporting the government.
Regardless of whether that effect occurs, there will be an income effect.
Everybody in that environment, whether they're on the side of the government or on the side of the insurgency, and including the insurgents themselves, is going to have more stuff and have more resources because we're pumping economic development into that area.
In this way, development assistance can actually strengthen the insurgency. But the potential conflict is not only limited to insurgents. It overflows into other parts of the population when a large amount of aid enters communities, and the locals have to decide where it goes.
So you're creating economic goods that local power brokers will then get into competition over, and the competition will actually sometimes result in violence.
Matt Milham saw this type of conflict firsthand. He is a reporter for Stars and Stripes, and earlier this year spent time embedded with the Marines in the Nawad district of Kandahar province. During his time there, he observed the Marines meetings with local politicians.
All the line ministers are constantly, it seems like, trying to build their own little kingdoms. They're trying to, make their offices nicer and trying to get more people and more buildings and that kind of thing. So when money goes to one effort and not another, you definitely see that, they feel like they're being left out.
And this feeling persists throughout the population, all the way to the poorest levels of society. While he was there, Milham saw the plight of squatters living illegally on government land who the government refused to recognize.
But as long as they're there and until they come up with a solution, those people are pretty much disenfranchised. They're not eligible for aid. They won't build schools there. The government won't allow the Marines to spend money there. So they're kind of stuck on the outskirts. So there's definitely, I think, probably a feeling that the government isn't offering anything to them. The Marines aren't offering anything to them. And, like I said, there probably is tension there.
Another problem that foreign aid has to deal with is wastefulness. With so much money involved, it's hard to imagine all of it actually being used effectively. Ahmed Rashid, Pakistani journalist and writer, and author of the bestseller Descent into Chaos, has been especially critical of aid administration.
There's a whole saga of bad management by the U.S. for the kind of money that's flooded into the country. Bad management, corruption, wastage, repeating projects, carrying out projects that are overpriced and overbilled. And I don't see, that has not got better.
Wastage is something that Ruddick has also encountered.
The U.S. military very often calls the amount of money which is spent, or measures it by something which they call the burn rate, and sometimes the money is really burned. I've seen food for works programs and road construction where people were shoveling dusts on almost non-existent roads and sometimes paving it a little bit, and after the next rain.
Kilcullen has seen it too.
For example, right now across Afghanistan, different agencies of various kinds are paying people to do things like cleaning trash up and clearing weeds out of their canals and tidying up, the production areas in farms and so on. For the last 5,000 years, if you're a farmer in Afghanistan, you clean your own goddamn canal.
When organizations use foreign aid to supplement villagers' incomes by monetizing elements of the rural economy, it can have a huge distorting effect on the community. Milham recognized this happening when he was in Afghanistan.
In Nawa, because there was so much money flowing in there, it definitely did sort of create this culture of dependence. This isn't just me talking. This is also, what the Marines were telling me. That the people got to the point where they just were waiting around for the Marines to hand out more money.
Clearly, this is not the way to do development. It's unsustainable because the international community will not always be there to support Afghanistan. There is an alternative, however, that everyone seemed to agree on. Here's Greg Howell from USAID.
Our focus is obviously on capacity building within the Afghan government, and we have a goal for 50% of that funds to be on budget, as we call it, or within the Afghan government.
And Ahmed Rashid.
Clearly, aid needs to be channeled much more to the government.
And David Kilcullen.
I do totally agree with the point that we need to do as much on budget as we possibly can.
And Thomas Ruddick.
So in general, of course, a lot of what gets in there for, let's call it reconstruction, needs to go through the government.
And Matt Milham.
If you can get it to a point where it appears that the Afghan government itself is the one that's handing out the money and the one that's coordinating these projects, and they actually are coordinating those projects, and they are the ones handing out the money, then really that's where you want to get to.
The advantage to channeling money on budget is really quite simple. The government itself can coordinate all the projects to prevent replication, and can avoid all the contractors that are notorious for wasteful spending. Plus, there's the benefit of capacity building. The Afghan government needs to take control over its own country, especially now that the international presence is drawing down, and handling foreign assistance and organizing development is a major step. Also, it ensures that the projects that have been implemented successfully are sustainable. In other words, that all the roads and schools and hospitals that have been constructed won't go into disuse and disrepair in 5 or 10 years because the government does not know how to maintain them. But not so fast. The Afghan government is not ready to handle all this money.
There are a lot of figures saying that which ministries of the Afghan government are able to spend the development budgets which are allocated to them, and then very often you find out that there are ministries who spend between 0 and 50% of it, and then that there's only a small number of ministries which is above the 50% level. So that's a problem. So there is absorption capacity problem definitely in Afghanistan.
So it may be a while before the government can handle all that money, but USAID is still trying. Howell, the deputy director of the USAID Office of Economic Growth, says his organization is working more closely with the Afghan government now.
And the first step is basically to to look at the financial systems of the various ministries in which we're working with to ensure they have the ability to utilize these funds effectively, and that is progressing.
And by no means has all the money been wasted. Howell listed a number of initiatives that have gained success, including in the microfinance area, the telecommunications sector, and the marble industry. There is a pattern emerging for successful development, described here by Kilcullen.
What I think we can say, though, is that the sorts of development assistance that tend to do better in a place like Afghanistan are things that focus on the village level or the district level, that focus on the improvement of traditional agriculture, basic infrastructure, energy, particularly electricity access at the village level, and then things that have to do with institutionalizing government.
Next week, I'll examine a project that follows those guidelines. It is administered by the Afghan government, and it's called the National Solidarity Program, which has been hailed as the most successful development initiative in Afghanistan. For War News Radio, I'm Jared Nolan.